guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Today we got a bunch of updates for Legion Remix specifically, and it looks like there's a bunch of nerfs that have been sweeping throughout Legion Remix, reducing the opportunity for players to be able to grind out both infinite power as well as gear the character through Mythic Plus dungeons, which definitely is worth talking about. However, even though we do have some nerfs early on, we do have more buffs on the horizon. Blizzard noticed that apparently a take meta has formed for Mythic Plus dungeons, and they want to make that environment much better for DPS and healer classes in the future. But also, this week we got some brand new hotfixes in order to add some much needed quality of life improvements to Legion Remix. So for today's video, these are the topics that I'm going to go over as quickly and efficiently as possible. But with that being said, if you guys want to see more regular updates for Legion Remix as well as future guides for those pieces of content, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. So first of all, I wanted to figure out how I'm going to structure this video. I think I'm going to give you guys the bad news first and then give you the good news right after. So first of all, let's talk about some of the different nerfs that have happened in Legion Remix. One of it being a gearing nerf from Mythic Plus dungeons, where previously Mythic Plus dungeons at the end of a run, you would loot a box, and depending on the key level, you would be able to actually get gear from Mythic Plus rewards. However, players found a way that you could actually use this in order to get into an instance, potentially get carried through the instance, and then get boosted up to a really high level. So for example, players were maybe getting like 675 item level gear from plus 30 keystones, and if you had like a really good tank that could just boost you through it and just one-shot all the mobs for you, that meant you were just skipping all that item level grind pretty quickly. So players were doing similar stuff like this with a couple of exploits in order to get into higher rank keys and get a lot of higher gear to develop a brand new watermark. And this allowed them to basically skip a lot of the gear and grind, so then you could go do world quests, go do story quests, collect a bunch of modes, transform them to gear, and then basically have a character that starts out at 675, where most people start out at like at 600 specifically, and you're skipping a lot of the gear grind and getting to item level 740 quicker than everybody else. So they actually ended up nerfing it by removing gear rewards from Mythic Plus dungeons, which is quite a significant nerf to players being able to have a stronger head start. That being said, the changes to Mythic Plus, however, made them slightly better. Of course, getting the actual gear, especially at really high item levels if you can get carried, is definitely a nerf. But that being said, now in Mythic Plus dungeons, instead of rewarding gear, they'll instead open you, whenever you open up the boxes, modes of broken time. The higher M plus dungeons you're going for, the more modes you're going to be able to get at a time. So in a sense, they actually changed it so instead of being able to jump item levels, all Mythic Plus dungeons, lower and higher, now allow you for some steady progression through modes of broken time. Because when you combine 10 modes, you almost always, get some sort of a gear upgrade for your character. So as you get through more modes, that is more and more gear that you're able to accumulate. So you no longer are able to skip whole item level watermarks, but at least now Mythic Plus does allow you to have some steady progression of gearing out a character, even if you're doing lower level keys. So even lower level dungeons now are valuable because all of them continue to give you even more modes so you can steadily progress to your character. So this is definitely a nerf, but also inadvertently a buff, especially for the more casual players that do some of the lower end dungeons. Another nerf that hit Legion Remix was players that ended up farming a bunch of infinite power actually saw the infinite power get decreased dramatically. This is very similar to if you played Mists of Pandaria Frog Farmers. So we had a Frog Farmer event yet again, this time in Legion Remix. The short and the long of the Frog Farmer event in MOP Remix was basically players would go to Timeless Isle, and the frogs, like literal massive frogs in that area, could be hyper farmed because they hyper spawned, and they were super generous in the reward drops, very similar to the original Mists of Pandaria release. They dropped you a ton of charms of good fortune, which could be traded in for boxes, which became bronze and power for your cloak, and the frogs themselves were also incredibly good for cloak grinding, so players would just sit there for hours and farm them endlessly. And then a bunch of players saw their cloak progression get nerfed, like they actually had to lower the rank of their progression. So what a lot of players that were above 10 million infinite power, like say in the 20, 30, they actually saw the infinite power get cut down to 10 million. So anybody who was using some cheesy methods of specifically farming elites in certain locations, farming certain herb and mining nodes, also apparently those gave insane amount of infinite power in right locations. Players were basically power farming themselves to have a ton of versatility. And there's many reports of players seeing somebody with like 300% versatility, and some players even saw somebody with 600% versatility. The way that versatility works is basically for every point into your artifact weapon, for every point into limits unbound, you get primary stat, stamina, and versatility. And you can actually see someone else's versatility when you hover over their character to see how far along they are into the artifact weapon. So 60% versatility, that means they get 16 points into the artifact weapon. So when you have somebody that has 300 points week 1 into limits unbound, or better yet 600 points, that is a lot. That is a huge power spike above everybody else. So basically, if you weren't there for the quick grinds of the elites and the nodes, which Blizzard did hotfix over time, you just missed out on a bunch of power. So they are reducing those players that did end up farming their infinite power down to 10 million. So on one hand, there's a bunch of players that saw that there's an exploit to be had and ended up farming it out as much as possible to create their character and make the most powerful character as quickly as they can, because that is part of the fun of Legion Remix, is to make a truly broken character. So for some, this nerf is basically an example of Blizzard detected that fun was being had and they had to nerf players' fun. But also, instead of, players being able to farm infinite power to become infinitely powerful, it's actually should be renamed to finite power, because you can only have a certain amount of finite fun with Legion Remix. Though with the content that we're playing, eventually you are supposed to be able to make a broken character to obliterate all of the content and solo all of the most difficult content of Legion Remix. You're just not supposed to do it this quickly, apparently. So the people are split into two different camps. One says that they definitely should not have nerfed it because players are just having fun, and they should just buff up the rewards from all other content, not just open world. But the other side believes that, yeah, no, this is obviously an exploit. The mobs were dropping way too many of these points, and being at 600 versatility with your artifact weapon week 1 seems a little bit ludicrous, especially with so many players that didn't know about these farm locations and are now just behind since all of them have been hotfixed. So feel free to sound off in the comments down below if you agree with this nerf for Blizz or disagree with it, and how do you think they should have handled it in the end of it. However, outside of the nerfs, we also do have good news on the horizon. As you'll notice, whenever you queue on for Mythic Plus dungeons, there's a good chance you've seen there's a lot of tanks out. I'm clicking literally everything that isn't dungeon screen. There's a lot of groups with tanks in there. The more tanks, the merrier. It's probably lower end dungeons, not that bad, but if you're going from like, I don't know, between 20 to 40 brackets, a lot of it are going to be tank groups. And maybe some DPS like Demon Hunters can usually hang with tanks, but it's very common for you to have an all tank run, which means that a lot of players are really just being, in a sense, gatekept from being able to even do dungeons because tanks are playing Legion Remix on easy mode. None of the mechanics hit them as hard as DPS, and plus majority of the damage comes from your artifact weapon anyway, so you can really queue into some difficult content, and as long as you can just survive it, you will be fine and you'll be able to make it through fairly easily, able to earn a bunch of rewards very, very quickly. But apparently they announced that there's going to be some tuning, especially next Tuesday when Phase 2 of Legion Remix hits. So they don't have any details, but apparently more buffs are coming to tanks, or rather DPS, as well as healers. They said buffs, so it doesn't sound like there's going to be nerfs for tanks specifically, so they're likely going to be increasing the damage and or healing and or just survivability of DPS classes within M+ content, so that there's more viability for you to run like a proper team composition with a variety of different classes, so you just don't have only tanks dominating the Mythic Plus environment. But for the time being, they didn't really have any details, like I said, on what these changes are going to be, so you're more than welcome to let me know in the comments down below what you think some of these changes should be in order to make DPS and healers better and more preferred than just running a full tank squad for Mythic Plus content. Aside of this, there's also been other hotfixes and improvements for Legion Remix recently. Hunters will notice that there's now more types of beasts roaming throughout the Broken Isles, including hyenas, cleft hoofs, core hounds, stone hounds, as well as devil swords. So if you're, let's say, a beastmaster hunter who loves having all these specialty pets that have extra unique abilities, you can now pick them up and add them to your collection, which is going to be super, super nice. I don't really know exactly where those pets are found, but I'm assuming they're just scattered all throughout the Broken Isles. Zandalari players will also find that there's now a Loa statue right next to one of the vendors. So if you need to choose which Loa you need to, spec into, normally you have to go to Zuldazar, but you're kind of stuck not able to go to Zuldazar from the Legion Remix zones. So now there's a little totem here for you to be able to interact with it in order to choose which Loa you want to get a passive buff from in order to better augment your character. One of the world affixes of Imperius, specifically in the Heroic World tier, now has been nerfed to some degree. It still has a buffing property, and they actually buffed the buff aspect of it a little, but the buff itself only lasts for like 10 to 15 seconds, and is not always permanent. So the mob will like roar out, buff allies for a little bit, but then the buff will fade for a short bit of time. So it's not something that passively is active, it is something that is active for a short bit before it subsides for a bit of time. Finally, they also adjusted how many mementos you're able to get from a variety of different gathering drops and a variety of different creatures. So that's something that they've done recently, like, you know, reducing elites and adjusting some of the nodes. But they also buffed up the rewards you can get from some of the more rich and some of the more rare nodes if you find them while out in the open world for herbalism and mining. And apparently there's also been adjustments for some of the mob drops when it comes to the mementos as well. So likely you may potentially be seeing slightly more mementos passively. Time will tell, but it looks like for the most part it's been like slight little buffs all across the board essentially. But with that, this is going to be a quick little update on everything happening with the Legion remix recently. As always, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching and hope you guys did enjoy this video. If you did enjoy it or did find it informative, go ahead and give this video a like, as would very much appreciate it. Also be sure to join our Discord community, especially if you want to keep up with anything Legion remix or potentially new updates for Midnight Alpha. And I'll be able to actually start some of the Midnight Alpha projects up really soon. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments below on everything we talked about for this video, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.